Hello fellow Unreal Engine artists, designers and developers. Today I'm releasing version 2 of my Simple Structures plugin. I did a video a few days ago which showed all the new features such as buildings, multi-level structures, mesh variations, mesh generators and other smaller features. But today it is released, so this video will show you how to download it, install it, and use all of the basic features. And as I said before, it's still completely free. Now this will probably be a longish video, so I will cover all of the basic tools and then I'll do a follow-up video in the next few days on the mesh generators in detail, and I'll do another one on using the landscape deformer in more detail. So stay tuned for that. So let's get straight into how to download and install. To get the plugin, follow the link in the description below and that will take you to my shop page on ko-fi.com, and you can see here the product ready to be downloaded. So you'll need to put in a value in how much you'd like to pay, but you can put in 0 if you want it to be free. If you want to put in £2 or £3 for a coffee, that would be greatly appreciated, but not necessary. So put in an amount there. Click on Get Now and it will download it in a zip format. And the main change in version 2 is it now supports Unreal Engine 5.4 as well as 5.2 and 5.3. So once downloaded, you will have it in your download folder as a zip file. So right click and extract that. After a few seconds you will have the extracted folder, and if you go into there you will see there are 3 versions of the plugin for Unreal Engine 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4, plus a README file. So I would suggest that you double click on that README file and read through it. It gives a brief description, tells you that Unreal Engine 5.4 is also added in this release. There are some important pieces of information that I've highlighted in red here that are worth reading through. Quick start videos points to the playlist, of which the video you're watching now is the first video that talks about download and installation. Then if you'd rather follow a set of instructions rather than listen to me tell you how to install it, you can follow the instructions here. A quick check on once you've done the installation if everything's okay. There's a Discord server that I've got if you want to join that to report any bugs or any feature requests. And then finally there's the release notes for version 2. So these are all the new features that I've added, and there's also a couple of bugs that have been fixed in this version as well. So again, worth reading through just to see what's new and what's changed. So let's go back to the install. So let's shut that down. So we've now got our extracted folder with the 3 plugins, and we just need to copy those to the Unreal Engine versions that you've got installed in your system. So I will open up a new Explorer window, and if I go into Unreal Engine 5.2, so they'll probably be in somewhere like Program Files, Epic Games, UE5.x, and then you need to go down into the Engine folder, plugins folder, and then within plugins it must be in a marketplace folder. If you haven't got a folder called marketplace because you haven't installed any third-party plugins, then just create a new folder called marketplace. And the reason for that is that when you come to package your game, it won't package it with the plugin unless it's in this folder. It'll work if you put it somewhere else, but save yourself some grief when you're packaging and put it in the right place to start off with. So open up Marketplace, and you might have some other plugins in here. You see I've got an old version of the plugin here. So if you've got an old version of the plugin, just delete it from there and then go to the extracted plugin, Control C or right click and copy, and then come over here and Control V or paste it in there. And just do the same thing for Unreal Engine version 5.3 and Unreal Engine 5.4 if you've got them installed. And then we are ready to set up a project with them in. If you've got any old projects using the plugin, it should all be backward compatible, so when you open them up they'll work just as they did before with these new versions. Now let's verify the installation of the plugin and test it out with a new project. So I've opened up Unreal Engine 5.2, but it doesn't matter which version I'm doing this in. And I'm just going to create a new third-person project, and I'll call it UBSS tutorial, and click on create. And so we now have a new project in here. What I can do now is go to the settings and plugins, or you can do edit plugins up at the top here, doesn't matter which. And you'll see there is a category here of mesh, and you can see there is UB Simple Structures plugin version 2. If you're opening a project which already used UB Simple Structures, then that will be toggled on by default. But because we haven't used it in this new project, we need to click to use it and then restart the editor. And after a few seconds, we're back into the project. And just to verify that the plugin is installed, if we go into Content Explorer, you will see that, let's just make this a bit bigger, you will see that in the section to do with the engine and plugins, if you go down, it's all alphabetical order, if you go down to UB Simple Structures Content, you'll see all these folders. So you'll see there's a couple of new folders. If you've used an earlier version of the plugin, you would be familiar with the Tools folder. We now have Tools version 2 and these new Tools mesh generators. So that's your first verification. If you don't see content here, by the way, if you go to settings, make sure that show engine content and show plugin content are checked on. Otherwise, it won't show that in your Explorer view. And we can do a quick check of the sample levels in here to see that everything looks okay. You can see that in addition to the basic showcase and the landscape showcase that I had in the earlier versions of the plugin, I now have a new basic showcase for version 2 and a new landscape showcase for version 2. So if I open up the basic showcase v2 level by double clicking on it, you can see here is the level, and it describes all of the different tools at your disposal. So single level structures, how to draw spline shapes, which is a standard Unreal Engine thing. And then after the single level structures, there's a section on the new multi-level structures, which includes walls and, more importantly, multi-level buildings. So you can have buildings that go up to sort of skyscraper level. So that's your verification that everything looks okay. Let's open up the landscape showcase as well, and that looks fine as well. So this shows you all of the things you can do with the landscape deformers and associated structures. So with that verified, let's now talk in high level about the tools that are available to you and how you use them. The first set of tools I'm going to talk about are the single level structure tools. So you can see in this section of the showcase map that we have the examples of single level structures. So there is a generic single level structure blueprint which you can drag in and use any mesh you want. And then there are some example ones that you can see above here, like tunnels, roads and bridges. And I've added this new picket fence you can see on the left hand side as well. So they all have broadly the same functionality. So let's give you an example of how you might use it. So if I go into the plugins and go to Tools version 2, you can see that you can drag in just a single level structure, which is completely blank, ready for you to add whatever you want to it. Or you could start with one of these examples. So let's actually start with the fence. This is nice and new, and I'll show you some of the features. So if you drag it in here, let's then focus in on it, and you can see we have a picket fence with a gate in the middle of it. So if you look on the right hand side, there are 3 sections that are common to all single level structures. They are structure, shape and conversion. So you would probably start with shape. So this allows you to generate a starting shape. You can manipulate the spline points as you wish, but you might want to start off with a shape before you then manipulate it further. So let's say this fence is going to go around a building. So we will use a rectangle shape. And by the way, you'll see there's a whole load more shapes than there were in first version. So not just lines and rectangles, but triangles, pentagons, hexagons, octagons, crosses, and various different starting points. Anyway, let's start with a rectangle. We'll do the length 1600 centimeters by 1600 centimeters depth. So it's going to be a square. And if you click on confirm shape change, it will adjust it. And you can see there that we now have a 1600 by 1600 fence. The next section that you'll probably want to visit is the structure. And this is all of the parameters around the generation of the meshes. So you can see the first option here is number of levels. Now, because it's a single level structure, you won't be able to change it. If you try and change it, it'll always reset it to 1. We'll talk about the multi-level structures and buildings later on in this video. Next thing is you can set a main mesh. So you can see here that is the picket fence that you're seeing repeated around here. And then you can also specify an angled corner mesh. So everywhere we have an angled corner rather than a curved corner, it will place the pillar or angle corner mesh. You can see the difference if I select this point and press T to make it curved. You can see that it now curves the main picket fence meshes and doesn't add the angle corner there. But if we do Shift T to make it back to an angle corner, it places that post in there as well. So there's also a couple of other options which aren't relevant to single level structures. We'll cover those later on when we talk about buildings. Now, before we go into the other meshes, which allows you to put other variations in there, let's talk about some of the common settings you can have here. First one is snap to surface, and as the name suggests, if I select the item here, if I then drag it up, you can see that it's always snapping it back to the underlying landscape or underlying meshes. It won't necessarily be flat, it will snap each point to underlying. So if you're doing this on landscapes, it may be that some of these points will be higher than others. So that is the snap to surface option. Next option is closed structure, and that joins the last point of the spline to the first point. So if I switch it off, you can see that we now have an open structure here, an open spline. So you can toggle between those two if you want a closed structure or an open structure. The next one is horizontal structure. This is different from snap to surface. If we take snap to surface off and we lift it up a bit, you can see it no longer snaps to surface. But we might want this to be level. I mean, if I pick one of these spline points and lift it up, you'll see that as I lift this, nothing is happening. That's because this horizontal structure is set on. So it's enforcing all of these points to be on the same horizontal plane. But if I uncheck that and lift it up, you'll see that now it no longer forces it to be horizontal as a structure. And this brings us on to the next option here of horizontal segments. You can see that this is checked on at the moment, so it means that each individual section is horizontal, which is the way that fences and walls would be built. They'd be built horizontally in sections. But if you've got curved structures and you want them to be more organic, you can switch that off and you can see those now go directly in that direction. And you can see it causes distortion in this sort of mesh, but if I changed it to a curved view, you can see that actually works quite well there. So let's go back to an angle corner, and if I put the horizontal structure back on, you can see that it is now forced all of the spline points to be on a horizontal plane. If I then put snap to surface on, it snaps to the underlying meshes or underlying landscapes. The other section here is other meshes. Now, if you used a previous version of the Simple Structures plugin, you would have only had the option to put 2 variations. Now you can add as many as you want here. So you can add more other meshes and you can have as many as you want. If you look at the skyscraper example at the back of this showcase map, you'll see there's quite a few meshes involved there with different settings. But you can see that I've got a gate here, and so if I open up the other meshes index for the first one, you can see that I've selected a picket fence door as the mesh, and then I have varying options. Now some of them will come into play when you're doing multiple levels, but if you ignore the levels for now, the key ones are, well, in fact the key one is horizontal mesh positions. Where do you want this to appear? You can have more than one, so you can see at the moment it's position 3. If I change that, it moves that mesh around. The next one you'd probably want to look at is the horizontal repeat. So at the moment we're not repeating at all here. So if I wanted to repeat that gate every 3 meshes, if I click 3 there, you can see that I'm getting a gate every 3 meshes here. If I do 0, it only puts it once. And it starts from the first index here. So if I put this to something like 12 and then say every 3, you'll see that it doesn't appear in the first 11. It's from 12 and then every 3 afterwards. So you can even have multiple meshes here as well. So let's put this back to horizontal repeat. So if we want one 12, position 12 and position 13, I can add another one here, 13, so I've got 12 and 13. And if I want both of these repeated every 3 meshes, I can do a horizontal repeat there, and you can see now I have 2 and a space, 2 and a space, 2 and a space from that point on. So hopefully that is fairly clear what that's doing. The only other thing which may be of interest here is that it's easy to figure out the first position in a mesh, not so easy to work out the last position, especially if you've got a long wall or a large structure where you don't know if that's position 50 or 60 or 70. So I've provided this end position flag here. So say I wanted the gate on the first position or the last position. Well, if I wanted it on the first position, let's delete one of these. So if I click on one, let's actually make it so it's a unclosed structure, open structure. So if I put position 1, that's the first position on this fence. But what if I want it on this last position? Well, I could add another one and just keep going through the numbers. But if I then stretch it, it's not going to be the last position. I'm not going to have to adjust the number again. So what I can do instead is I can just click end position, and you can see it appears in the last position. And even if I stretch this, it will always appear in the last position. Whereas if I'd put a specific position number, that would be staying there. So that's useful as well. And then the final thing to talk about is mesh probability. So if you, at the moment, mesh probability is 1, which means it will always appear in the space you've asked it to. Let's uncheck this end position. Let's say we want to do it every 3. So that's nice and regular. But we can also do a mesh probability of it appearing there. So if I do 0.5, there's a 50% chance of it appearing every time it's spawned. So you can use that to do a bit of randomness in your structures. Now let's move on to talk about multi-level structures, which take what we've talked about and extend it a bit further. So you have a generic tool called UB multi-level structure. If I open up my tools, you can see I've got multi-level structure here. And then I have 2 specific examples of that. One is UB wall, which is a multi-level wall. And then UB building extends this to allow the generation of staircases, floors, stair walls, roof ledges. Actually, there's quite a lot of extra features in there, so we'll talk about that separately. But let's talk about the core multi-level structure. And again, you can drag that into a level if you want to use it. Let's look at the wall version here. You can see that we have a wall on over 2 levels, and the levels are slightly different. So the first level has a door, and the second level has repeating windows. So you probably can figure out from what we talked about in the single levels how we did the repetition. The only difference here is we now have options in the vertical plane as well. So let's actually look at this one and see how it's changed from the single level structure. So if you look on the right hand side, we've got the same three sections: structure, shape and conversion, so we can generate starting shapes. Actually, something I didn't talk about before is if you want to quickly switch between curved shapes and straight shapes for the whole structure, you've got these options at the top to convert structures to curved and straight or back again. So if I wanted this angular wall here to be a curved structure, I could just click on this and it creates a curve for each point, and if I want to go back to straight, I can do that. That's for the whole structure though, so if you've got a mixture of the two, then just be careful because you will destroy what you've worked on so far. And if at any point in time something doesn't look quite right, this especially happens when you're working with landscapes and landscape deformations. Sometimes it doesn't catch up quickly. You can just click the refresh button and it'll make sure that everything is rejigged and regenerated correctly. So let's have a look at this in more detail. So if I go into the structure, you can see that the number of levels, you can now have multiple levels. So we're no longer restricted to one level. I can have 3, 4, 5, however many I want. Let's go back down to 2 levels. And then you can see that I've got a door on the ground level only. So the main mesh I've got here is the wall. That appears, you generally put the mesh that appears in most of the structure as your main mesh. And another thing to be aware of is that the length of your main mesh is the length that the spline wall will be segmented into. So you want to try and make sure that all your meshes have the same length. Otherwise, they'll be squished or stretched to fit in with all of the others. Anyway, that's the main mesh here. And then if we go into other meshes, you can see that we've got 2 other meshes there. The first one is the door, and we're having it starting on level 1. Now, we didn't use the levels in the single level structure, but now these come into play. So we're going to have the door start on level 1, but we're not going to repeat it. So it's not going to repeat on any levels, and that's why it just appears on that first level there. Everything else pretty similar to what I showed before. We've got a particular position for the door, so we could move the door left or right here, and that's just appearing on that first level. If we look at the second mesh here, it's the window. This time we start on level 2 and we repeat it on every level. That's why when I made it 4 levels, it repeated on levels 3 and 4 as well. If I had changed the repeat every level to 0, it only appears on that level. Or if I set it to repeat every 2 levels, it doesn't appear on the 3rd floor. So that's how you do repetition on the vertical plane. Let's put that back down to 2. And again, we have got no position here really. We've just started at position 0 because we're repeating every mesh, so we don't really have to put a position here. You do have to put something in there though, so if I delete that, you'll see that it doesn't do horizontal repeat of 1 if you haven't got something in your horizontal mesh position. Let's now talk about the specific building blueprint here, which extends the multi-level structure to add various elements. So you can see there used to be a structure called UB room. I've left it in, if you go to the original tools folder, you had this UB room, which had staircase and roof and stair walls, but couldn't be extended onto multiple levels. I've left it there for backward compatibility, but now you can do everything and more with this UB building structure. So let's have a look at what you can do with buildings. Let's look at the basics first. If I select one of these here. So we still have our 3 sections: structure, shape and conversion. Difference here is we now have 3 new sections: floor, staircase and roof. And there are quick options up here to toggle those things on and off. So if we take this first one here, let's focus in on it. So if I do toggle floor, you can see that it adds a floor to the building. If I do toggle stairs, it adds a staircase to the building. And if I do toggle roof, it adds a roof to the building with a roof hole leading up to it. These are the sort of starting points for you, and then you've got a wealth of options available to you for changing all of these elements here. So let's just start off with the floor. So with the floor, you've got the toggle on and off, same as the button I just pressed. You can then override the material of the floor. So I might want it to be a wood floor, so I've chosen the wood floor material, and you can change the UV scaling of that as well. So you can see the planks here. If I change the scale, you can see they get either closer together or further apart. And then you have options for offsets of scale and rotation of the floor. Now, I would not do too much with the rotation because you'll end up with some kind of strange results, but it's there in case there are some exceptions where you want to do it. Floor scale can be interesting. If you scale it up slightly on the X and Y axis, you get overhanging platforms. You can do a similar thing with the roof as well. If I go down to the floor level, you can see that by default the floor is very thin. It's almost lined up with the plane underneath. But if you want to make the floor thicker, you can use the floor offset location. So on the Z-axis here, if we make this 10, you can see, or 20, you can see that it thickens the floor there, so that you might want a sort of slightly thicker or step up into the level. So that's the floor parameters, pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Let's move on and look at the staircase section. So this has quite a few more options available. So if you click on create staircase, it will create a staircase, and by default it will create a single staircase. So let me reset it to how it would look originally. So you get a staircase that goes from this point that says staircase transform up to the roof level, and you can move the staircase around with this widget here. You can select it, it's called staircase transform, and you can move it around. And there now you have choices over the various parameters available to you. So you can have a solid staircase, you can have a floating staircase, which doesn't have any elements underneath it. By the way, if you create multiple levels in the buildings, the subsequent ones will all be floating, otherwise you'll hit your head going up on the next level. So let's put that to a solid staircase. You can choose how many steps you want in the staircase and adjust those, and then you can adjust things like the width of the staircase and the length of the staircase, or I should say the length of each staircase section. So each one will be the same. The next thing is the more interesting thing, is that this allows you to add more sections to your staircase. Now, as I said, it will always go up to the next level, the next roof level. So if you want to have multiple sections, you might want to have meshes that are taller. This is only 4 meters, so really there's only really room for one staircase going up there. So if you want to use multiple staircases, you're probably going to use meshes which are maybe 8 meters high instead, so that you've got room for that. But the way you do it is you click on these more stairs, and it then generates other staircases going in a relative direction to the first one. So if we wanted to do left, it would go forward and then left in relation to it. Now we can probably reduce the number of steps here now because it's a slightly narrower height increase. I've added some extra features to this because one of the things you couldn't do in the previous version is you couldn't have staircases that double back on each other, which is a common thing in a lot of places. A lot of buildings, you go up and then you immediately go back up to the next level. So now we've got this shift option here, So what it does is it shifts the landing to one direction, and then you can do something else. So we could do shift left, and then we'll add another one here, and we'll go backward. And so what you see happens is that I go up one level, I shift the landing to the left, and then I go backwards up to the staircase. So next thing is you can add in your own override materials. You can see by default, it's the same with the floor, that it defaults to the main mesh material if you don't do anything. But what we can do is we can choose another material. So let's choose, I don't know, concrete here. And we can change the scaling of it as well. So if it was a very tiled surface here, then we could change the staircase scale to change the tiling. So those are the main parameters. Now, next choices you have is you have this staircase transform. Well, this is effectively the same as this widget here, which you can move around. You can't scale the staircase, but what can be useful is to rotate it. So you can either rotate it with the rotation here, or you can use the rotation in the staircase transform. So if I press spacebar, it will change to a rotation widget, and I can now rotate around. And you see you can have a staircase at a different angle there, or I can just rotate it back to how it was. So useful to be able to not only move the staircase, but also rotate it into position that you want. And then the last feature here is stair walls. When you have staircases that go up high, you obviously want to prevent your occupant from falling off the stairs and injuring themselves. So there are various stair wall options here. So if I click on stair walls, you can see that let's go up a bit so you can see a bit more. You can see that it has now added walls around the stairs to prevent that. And those will follow the staircase for whichever direction it goes in. You can adjust the thickness of the wall to your liking, and you can also override the material here as well. So if I wanted a different sort of tiling on here, let's do this. You can adjust the material, and again you can adjust the scale of the material as well. I haven't shown you this yet. So previously you just had this full walls option. You now have options for just generating the walls on the landings. That's the sections where you change direction. Or you can have a couple of pole options here as well. So these are just poles that are acting as a support. So if you had something like a floating staircase, it means that it has something to actually rest on the wall. So there's square poles and round poles as options there, and again you can change the thickness of those as well. So let's move on to the final section, which is the roof. And again, this has lots of different options available to us. So if we and by the way, what I haven't shown you yet is if you have multiple levels, let's go down to the structure and make this a 2-level building. So at the moment we're generating doors and windows, but let's not worry about that. We can change that later. But what you can see is if I go in a bit closer, let me just slow down this. You can see that the first level staircase, I think that was solid. Actually, let's get rid of the stair walls so you can see this. So let me get rid of the stair walls. Okay, so let's make that so it's not a floating staircase. What you can see is that the first staircase is solid, but that the subsequent staircase is floating. And that will be the same if you had a third or fourth level. And if you think about it, that has to be the case, because otherwise, as you go up these stairs, you are going to run into a solid wall. So it will do that by default. So go back to the roof. Let's create a roof here, and by default it will create a roof on every level. So again, let me just go in here slowly. Yeah, and you can see that I have a roof on this intermediate level as well as on the top level. You don't have to have that. I'll show you that later on. You can have just a roof on the top level only, especially if you just want to generate large buildings, sort of exterior buildings like the skyscrapers over there. You don't want the intermediate floors. So the Next parameter here is called roof hole sections. Now what this means is that if you have a staircase that's going up to the next level, how many of those staircase sections should I use to cut holes in the roof? So by default it's only going to do the last one, but if I change that to 2, it's generating a hole for the staircase and the previous landing. And if I change that to 3, it's generating it for all of the sections. Now you can see that we've got a little thing in thin air here, so it's probably worth having stair walls for this particular example to make it look right. So let's add stair walls as well, and now you can see that looks fine. Okay, next thing is the roof thickness. So you can change that to your liking, and you can see that the roof is getting thicker, going down from the roof level, and you can adjust that to your liking. You've got roof collision option. In 99% of cases you'll want roof collision switched on, because you want to be your player to be able to stand on the roof and run around. The only situation where I can think of where you probably wouldn't want that is if I come over here. You can see that I've got a UB pool option, which also has floored staircase options. It's very similar to the building. The roof here is water material, so I've set the roof collision off there so that you can actually go through the water and back out again. Other than that, you'll usually have roof collision on. Okay, let's come back here. Next thing is the material options. So again, we can change that. By the way, I've provided some example materials which are two-sided for the roof. So you can see if I have wood roof concrete ceiling, it's an extension of a material called 2SZ, I think I called it, two-sided on the Z-axis, and that allows you to specify a different material for the underside. So you can see under here it's concrete, and at the top it's the wood material. So two-sided material there, and again you can change the scale to suit your player. Next thing is the roof offset location, and you see at the moment we're completely in line with the meshes at the top, and you're getting a little bit of Z fighting going on there. You'll typically want to sink the roof a bit into the top of the structure, so you could put something like -10 on the Z, and you can see that it just sinks the roof a bit. But you don't need to worry about all of the other calculations, so things like where the staircase ends and the walls will all be recalculated accurately. You can also change the roof scale, so sometimes you might want roofs that overhang slightly. So if I do, this is a bit like what I showed you with the floor. If I date it to 1.1 by 1.1, you're getting an extra 10% on each floor. So you can see they're overhanging on all the floor levels, just like I did the roof levels, just like I did on the floor. You can also rotate the roof if you want, although again I'd use that with caution. Maybe do a little bit of it for some sort of wacky view, but if you go too far it's going to look a bit strange. And then we have this top level option, which has actually quite a few parameters in it. First one is, do you want a staircase? Well, actually, the second one we'll do first. The staircase to the top level. If you click that off, then it will do staircases in the structure, but it will end on the final level, and you won't be able to get up to the roof level. So we'll do staircase to top level if we want to go up onto the roof. And actually, let me just take an aside from that. If you do go to the roof level, you might obviously want something to prevent your occupant from falling off. So it brings me back to something I haven't spoken about yet. If I go down to the structure section, you've got these two options here for a rooftop mesh and a rooftop corner mesh. So if I go there and select, I think I've got one called wall, did I call it wall or castle? Can't remember. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, rooftop castle. If you look at that mesh here, you can see that it creates this sort of castellation, I think they're called, view. And we also have the options for corner meshes for these corners as well. So if I do rooftop again, I think I've got a rooftop pillar here. Okay, and you can see that's square and this one's round. So maybe I want to change the main one to round, square as well. So let's do pillar square. Okay, and they kind of tie in with each other now. So now on the top level, I have got a mesh that's only exists on that top level. And if I then make the number of levels, say 5, you can see that that mesh still only appears on level 5 there. So that works. Right, anyway, back to the other roof parameters. So let's go back up here. So we had done the roof scale. Oh no, we're in the top level and we were looking at the staircase to top level, turn that on and off. The other thing we can do is have the roof on the top level only. And that will make sure that it doesn't appear on any intermediate levels. This is particularly useful if you're generating buildings for exterior only usage, because it won't generate intermediate or intermediate geometry in the floors that you won't ever see because you won't be inside the building. So that can be quite useful for tall buildings. Okay, so let's turn that one off. Now, the other one that I've added, which I'm pretty pleased with because it gives you a raft of other options, is this pitched roof option. So instead of a flat roof on the top level, if you click on pitched roof, you can see that it now brings all of those points in the spline to a point. Let's make that pitched roof height a bit taller so you can see it. Okay, so, and you can have it with or without the roof ledge. It actually looks quite nice with the roof ledge there. It looks like a sort of French chateau, but you can take that off if you don't like it. Now this works pretty well in almost all of the shapes. Obviously if your shape is really wacky, you might get some distortion there, but I've tried it in quite a few different configurations and it works pretty well. However, you're not limited to just getting to a point. You've actually got the ability to scale the roof at the top and the bottom. So the bottom scale works similarly to what you've seen before. So if I did 1.1, 1.1, you can see that the pitched roof is coming out a bit at the bottom. But where the magic happens is if you actually have different scales for the X and the Y axis at the top. So for example, if I make the X scale at the top 1, you can see that I've ended up with a gable end to this roof. So it's basically like a sort of a regular house. And similarly, if I swap it round, make that 0 and make that 1, we've got a gable end on the other side, like that. But you can actually have intermediate values here. So if I make that 0.3, say, you're ending up with something which has a little bit of a ridge line, but the x-axis comes to a point, but the y-axis comes to the top. So play around with that. That's quite a lot of fun, and it even works with curved structures as well. So if I change the structure to curved, you can see that I've got a curved structure which comes to a point. Let's make that back to 0 here. And you can see that's a complete conical sort of hat at the top there. So worth experimenting with that. If you do see some anomalies, because I don't think it can cater for every single shape and option, then you probably find if you tweak some of these settings here, or you just move your spline points a bit, you'll probably get a reasonably working example. So have fun with that. And again, I've actually allowed you to, well, you can move the location of the rooftop. Sometimes if you have very strange shapes, your point might be way over to one side, and you can use the rooftop location to recenter the top. So move that as you see fit. And you can also override the material on the top separate from the other roof levels. So you can see that we've got this sort of wood level for the intermediate floors, but what we could do is let's do a different tiled setting here. Yeah, so now we've got more of a tiled roof, separate from the wood floor concrete ceiling of that and the wood floor at the bottom. All of the simple structure tools have a section for conversion to a final static mesh. So while you're developing your level, all of these elements will work when you play in the editor. The only thing is that when you go and you play in a standalone game or you package your build, certain dynamic elements like the staircases, walls, floors and roofs won't show up unless they are converted to a static mesh. And in any case, you probably want to convert your spline meshes into static meshes anyway, because they will be more performant and they will react better to light in your scene. So as I said, all of these tools have a conversion section. So at the moment we have, let's look at this wall here. This wall is a spline mesh, so it's generating all of these dynamically with each segment represented by a little static mesh component. When we are happy with it and we want to package it up, we can just click this final structure to static mesh. Let's just open up the meshes. This shows us the final mesh that's created. If you want to have nanite meshes, you can just click on here. If you don't, then just leave it unchecked. So click on final structure to static mesh, and literally within like half a second or so, you'll see the generated static mesh here. And that has now been replaced in this component by a static mesh as well. So if you don't do anything more and you just go into gameplay or you publish the game, that will now be a static mesh in this component. So there's really no visible difference here. Only thing you'll notice is if you try and do any changes. So for example, if I now change that spline point, you'll go, oh, that hasn't updated. Well, that's because it's now a static mesh and it's set in stone. So if you want to do any other changes, it's very simple. You just go reset all to dynamic, and you can see now we're back to a dynamic mesh, and you can see the static mesh here has now been reset to or cleared. So again, once you've got it looking the way you want it, you just do final structure to static mesh. And there we go, we're now back into a static mesh. And if you browse, you'll see that it creates it in a particular folder. I think it's something that was defined in one of the variables here. So there's the static mesh path. That's the folder that it will store these meshes in your project. You can see that it's in this UB meshes folder, and then it's creating a subfolder with the name of that particular component. It's called UB wall v3 in the level. So that way you'll see all of the separate static meshes in subfolders. So that's how you do simple structures. So your single level structures and walls and things like that are just done with this one button here. It's slightly different for buildings because they have multiple elements. So if we look at this building that we created earlier, if you go down to the conversion section, you can see now we have two buttons, and in the meshes you can see there are meshes for each of the different components and then for the final structure. So for the most part, you'll want to convert all of the building parts to static meshes. So that's the floors, stairs, stair walls, roofs, before creating it as a final structure. So you don't have to create the final structure, but then the spline will be dynamic, and for the reasons I gave earlier, that's not ideal for the final package either. So let's click on that first, building parts, and you can see that we now have 4 static meshes here: the roof, floor, staircase and stair walls. And once you've seen those generated correctly, just click on final structure to static mesh, and now we have a final version that's got everything in it. And as well as this one here being replaced by the static mesh, you can actually just now add in other versions of that static mesh around without even using this element here. You could go to the static mesh here, and you can drag it onto your level, and you can see we can add in other, let me just go along here, we can add in other copies of this level into this level, rotate them around, and each of these are static meshes versions of that. So if we went back to the original one here, and just like we did with the wall, if we want to make any changes, we have to reset it. Obviously, if I do any changes, nothing will happen at the moment. So if I try something like changing it back to a straight structure, you can see that the spline is straight, but nothing has updated here. So let's go down to the conversion section, reset all to dynamic, and you can see now it has updated this with the dynamic floor, ceiling, pitched roof, everything else. And then we can go through this element again. We can change the building parts and final structure, and you will see that our instances, static mesh instances over here, have changed to reflect this new version. So it's pretty straightforward. The only case where you would only want to do the building parts and not the final structure, and I think I've said it on here, is yes, you don't want to use it on pools, because you want the pool top here to not have a collision. So if you do building parts to static meshes, you will get a static mesh here with no collision on, but the actual final part will have collision. So that's pretty much the only case where you wouldn't want to do that. As part of version 2, I've created these tools to generate the mesh components for your structures. So I started off with these 4 components that generate walls in various configurations, pillars for the angled corners, different door options and different window options. I'll probably do a separate video on the detail of this, because this video is getting pretty long for an introductory video. But just quickly to show you, if you go into the plugin, you will see that there is a folder called Tools Mesh Generators, and you can just drag these in to generate various elements with you. So you drag these into your scene, you adjust the settings, and then generate a static mesh, and then you can add that static mesh to your building, wall, or whatever other structure you are creating. There's quite a few options on here, so as I said, I will save that for another day. But if you go into the showcase level, you can see there's an example of each 4, and you can kind of look on the right hand side and start to get an idea of the different options available for you for each sort of section. So if you go into here, you've got like window settings, wall settings, and again conversion settings for generating your final static meshes. So we'll save that for another day. Hopefully I'll do that in the next day or 2, so you can see how to use these, because they're pretty powerful for creating your components. In fact, you see the skyscraper over here with the sort of different ground level doors, different windows here, and then these large reflective windows. You can see these were the mesh components, and they were all generated using these mesh generator tool. So I will explore that. In fact, let's have a go at making that, and that's probably a good introduction to it. Save that for another section. So I think that's about it for now. A lot for you to have fun with, so get stuck in and let me know if you find any bugs, or if you can think of any other things you want adding to it. I'm going to take a well-earned break from this, because I've been working on this for the last few months and I need a bit of a break before tackling the next release. So have fun, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.